Okay, let's talk about spacing. So spacing is really vital whenever you're doing layout, because if you take all your information and just cram it together willy-nilly, again, it becomes hard to read. And also there's some practical points to spacing, so let's talk about the first practical point. Now, if I show my guidelines, which are these bright blue lines here, this inside one is where it is getting cut. So I need to be careful not to get something so close to that edge that it starts feeling squished or needing more space, or where it will accidentally get cut. So it's actually really good to create guidelines for kind of a safe zone. Now, depending on the size of your project, the safe zone size could vary. On a business card, it's about 1/8 of an inch. On something this size, I would recommend about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to put guidelines here, but when I look at my rulers, I can see that there's not easy measurements right here. It would be much easier if my zero started here so I could measure exactly 1/4 of an inch. Now you have what's called a 0 point. It's up here in the left by the rulers, and you can move it by clicking and dragging to a new location. So if you watch and I drop that little X, all of a sudden I have my ruler set to 0 right here and right there, and it would be very easy to pull a guideline down and go, okay, there's 0, 1 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch. And do the same thing over here. Now if you find that your guideline is trying to pop to something, so in this example it's trying to line up with the edge of this word, you can turn that Snap To feature off. It's up in View and under, there it is, Snap. So now I can move these and not have them pop all over the place. So that's a useful feature. I tend to turn it off and on while I'm working with a project. So once again, over here on this side, I need to have a 1/4 inch guide in from this trim mark. So I'm dragging out a 0 point and then placing a guideline. And same down here on the bottom. Oops, zoomed in here. Zooming out. 1 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch. Okay. So now as I'm placing things, I can make sure that I don't cross that edge with any of my type. That's really important. The exception might be down here in the tabs, but we'll get to that later. Okay, let's move on to really final. Now that we've looked at a couple different ways to arrange things. I'm going to pull my little sketch down here so I can see it. I have kind of a group up here and a group down here, and I've tied them together with a little dotted line because on my design board that was one of the graphics I liked. So when I was thumbnailing this, I was deliberately thinking, okay, how can I use a dotted line on here? So I thought, well, I'll put my most important information up here and then create a line to visually guide my people down to the next bit of information. So I'll just kind of talk you through what I'm going to do. I think I'll change the way this banjo looks by just rotating it. And drop it behind my word here. So I don't really care for the center thing. That's just me personally designing. I know a lot of other people are different. And I want to also keep in mind my aligning, and I would like to have these two groups of information so that they're aligned not only on one side, but on both sides. So for the moment, I can even pull out some guidelines to help me do this. And scratch is the most important thing, so I'll line up everything else to it. And you could do that by going in and changing the size of the type or just by transforming it, which I think is kind of easier. Okay. So this is sort of my main grouping up here, and I think I even want to change the size of this banjo so that it's right there on the edge. But before I do that, let me hide my guidelines for a second. Or not, I need them. I'll take away that old guideline over there. Let's talk about tangents just a tiny bit. So when we look at designs, it's uncomfortable to see where things almost touch. It's much more comfortable to have them either overlapping or moved completely off so that they're not touching. Also, remember that applies over here because this is your outside trim line. This is the guideline that you made to keep your type where it needs to go. This is the trim line, so this banjo here is almost touching the edge. That's kind of uncomfortable. So I'm going to take away all possibility of uncomfortableness, grab all of these objects and move this banjo so that it's actually running off the page and will get trimmed off a little bit. And I'm doing that both here at the top and down here at the bottom. And I think I actually want to make it a little bit smaller so that that edge lines right up with the edge of my main word. So again, I'm paying attention to alignment. Okay, so that's kind of one group, and I've used some alignment here and alignment there. One of the things I am looking at, and it'll come together a little more down here, is the spacing between things and keeping it kind of even. So overall there's about a little less than 1/4 inch through here, and I'm going to look at how that relates right there. So keeping your spacing even is also something that can help give unity and harmony to your design. Alright, let's do our other little object here. There's, I'm sure, several ways I could arrange this stuff, but this is kind of what I played around with and thought, you know what, this looks really good. So I actually have done some other playing around with this that you guys weren't around to see, to find what I liked. So here I'm looking right here to line these two up, and in fact I'm just going to grab them, grab my text tool, left align my text, grab my move tool, and then use the left align button there. And that'll do both. Did I hit that left align? Oh, I did, but you know what? This type set actually doesn't quite work that way. Alright, so here's a good example. This does not look aligned because this bottom edge of the N looks like it should be lining up with this outside edge of the 2, but the top of the 2 is further inside than the bottom of the 2. This is one of those where you go with what looks right rather than technically this is the outside edge. So I'm going to line that up to the top edge. That's actually a good example to have in here. I'm glad that showed up. And a QR code, which I think I said you can check in our resources for how to make those, or even just Google it. They're pretty common anymore, so it's really easy to find information on them. Because I want there to be, and this is written up in the requirements for this assignment, that the main part of the flyer has to have some way to get more information. So not necessarily contact, but get more information about the event. Because what if somebody came along and took all of the tabs and then this was all that was left? If there was no information on there for contact or additional, then you would be potentially losing some of your audience. Okay, so here I've got kind of a group, and I like the way that looks. Once you have things arranged, you can do this really cool little trick where you link the layers so you don't have to grab all of them and move them together every time. So here I'm clicking on each one to grab that grouping, and then in my layers I can right click and choose link layers. No, it didn't tag. There we go. Link layers. And a little link will appear over here. Now I can just grab one of those and drag, and it will take the whole group with it, which is kind of nice. Okay, so I'm looking at this top one and this bottom one, and I'm going to get this little orange dot out of the way and thinking, okay, well I know I want this over here somewhere because that's how I put it on my sketch, but what is there that I can align that will make this look like it connects to the top? And if I pull out a guideline to line up to that edge, I can see that maybe lining up the edge of the 26, because that's kind of the big emphasis down here. And again, this is something you just have to move around a little bit and play, you know. put a guideline out, line up different parts of it, and see what works. Now if I put this clear over here, this would feel really lopsided, like all of this information was over here. And I want to use the principle in design of balance. So in our design part of the website, let me even just hop over there. Design principles. We have some things called balance, and this would be an example that's more like this one, asymmetrical balance, where even though the pieces are all different sizes, together they add up to feel like about the same weight. So we're going to offset, kind of how this one is, those two sets of weights that will create some visual balance. Okay, so we've got that group. Now, what to do with this other little type? In my document here, I have some negative and positive space. So what the positive space is where objects actually are. Negative space is the area around them. And the more negative space something has around it, the more emphasis that object has. So if I did want to give this more emphasis, I could left align this type, maybe over here. But I really like the idea of having two groups, so I'm going to actually right align the type to fit up against this. Now, this almost works. I should probably align this with, make sure that it lines up with the top here or here. So just anything you can think of where you're like, you know what, if I made that edge also line up, it would look just a little bit better. So I can lead out my type by selecting all of it and then holding down Option and moving my arrow key. Okay, so that looks like it's lined up pretty well with the top and the bottom of that group. Now again, spacing, I'm going to look at the spacing I've already got up here and put roughly that same spacing down here for this object. And once again, just keep in mind a lot of this is visual tweaking. You just move stuff around until it looks right. So I've looked at this space and decided I actually want a little more space over here, but these objects are linked. You can turn a link off by holding down Shift and clicking on it, and then you can move things over. So I need to do that to both of these layers. And then you can reestablish the link by Shift clicking on it again, and now that's all as a group. Alrighty, that's looking pretty good. I think at any point you can come back in and select parts of your object and make it bigger. Now I'm going to do something I think I did and then didn't tell you about. If you have a background graphic, I find it really useful to lock that graphic after it's placed, because often you will accidentally grab it and move it. So once you establish what that background graphic looks like, I highly recommend locking the layer, and you can do that by clicking on it and clicking this little lock. Alrighty. So now I need that visual element that ties it together, and also if I check back at my design board, I have some circle elements that I wanted to use. So I liked these little dotted lines, and I liked the circle element. And I've actually gone and created a brush that is a dotted line. And if you don't remember how to do that, just check back into our brushes week section, and I want to emphasize that the one night is all they're playing, and then to bring in some of that whimsy, I think I'll curly cue this over and use it to kind of point down to the 26. And keep in mind, I'm using a tablet, so this is an easy thing to do for me. If you're creating curly cues that you're going to use a brush to stroke, I highly recommend using your path tool and setting it to just path. So not making a shape unless you specifically wanted to In fact, we could do that on this, but I already made a brush, so I'm just going to use it as a brush. So I've kind of arranged and tweaked this to where it needs to be. I have my brush, have a new layer set up, and I'm going to hit return to stroke it. Yay, I like that. And then my little circle, this, as the size it is, seems to be grabbing way too much attention, so I'm going to make it smaller and use it more as like an end point right here. I had some layers that got outside of my group folder, so I thought I'd tidy up. Alrighty, that's looking pretty good. Sort of a last look though, as far as spacing goes. Right now it feels like it's still a little left lopsided, and the reason for that is because there's more space here between the edge of this group and the edge of the object than there is up here. So I want to make those about the same. And in this case, it would mean I either have to stretch out my little dotted line that I just did or move it. So I'm going to just grab all this stuff and move it over. So I'm going to show you a quick trick of how to double check your measurements, but let's do that in the next tutorial so you can take a breather.